Welcome, my beloved Patreons. This is Aleister Nacht. In this episode, we're going to discuss Satanic Lust and its application in satanic magic. We're also going to take a look at the history of satanic lust and lust in general, and how sex has evolved over time and continues to evolve. This is certainly not going to be a pornographic video. This is an appreciation of where we are and where we came from as humans, and the evolution of sex and our practice as Satanists. First, let's charge the words. Satanas, we ask for your divine guidance to open the gates of infernal wisdom for the listener. We call upon the spirit of lust to lead us to satanic temptation. Demons of the pit, reveal that which is beyond the veil, and especially satanic blessings for you, my Patreon. So mote it be. Some of the references that we will be using will be Satanism and Devil Worship, Magnae Sapientiae Satanas, and Sanctum of Shadows, Volume 2, Corpus Satanus. I'm also going to take sections from Magia Sexualis, a treatise on sexual magic by Pascal Beverly Randolph. Also, I will be taking some references from Magiae Sexualis, Sex, Magic, and Liberation in Modern Western Esotericism by Hugh B. Urban. We begin with Aleister Crowley, who was part of the OTO, Golden Dawn, and ultimately his own coven of practitioners in Thelema. Aleister's name was actually Alexander. An interesting note is Aleister Crowley was actually an homage to the hero of Shelley's poem, Aleister, the Spirit of Solitude. The sexual act is a sacrament of will. To profane in its great offense, all true expression of it is lawful. All suppression or distortion of it is contrary to the law of liberty. This quote is from Aleister Crowley's book, The Law is for All. One of Crowley's followers and person who actually started the Agape Lodge in Southern California was Jack Whiteside Parsons. His ritual operation, called Babylon, and no, that's not a misspelling, that is the way that he spelled it, Babylon working, which had the goal to shatter the boundaries of time and space in order to bring about the incarnation of the magical child. It's interesting to note here that his fellow cohort in this operation was L. Ron Hubbard, who went on to future success with the Church of Scientology and his book Dianetics. As you can see, all of these things begin and in many cases are intertwined throughout history. Pascal Beverly Randolph was a doctor who practiced some of the earliest known sexual remedies and tried to treat things like erectile dysfunction and these different maladies through science. And here in his quote, he says, "Magic is a science. It is the only science which occupies itself, theoretically and practically, with the highest forces of nature, which are occult." We also see influences early on from people like Gerald Gardner, who in his charge in his book of Shadows, he says, "And ye shall be freed from slavery, and as a sign that ye be really free, ye shall be naked in your rights, and ye shall dance, sing, feast, make music, and love." It's interesting to note that his book of Shadows was strongly influenced by Aleister Crowley, the OTO, Golden Dawn, Freemasonry, and many other influences. We also see before Garner, from Margaret Murray, we start to see the first semblances of the great goddess or the great mother being mentioned. We also see the first references to the great rite. So these things came before Gardner. However, they're still pervasive today throughout Wicca and other occult practices as well. We see some of the first references to the Black Mass and really the methodology that would be taken up by the occult in general, referenced in the Grimoire of Honorius. This is attributed to the Pope himself, and it contains various instructions that are used for the Black Mass. It even includes the sacrifice of a chicken and other offerings as well. The objective of this Black Mass was to summon spirits, a tradition that is still practiced even today in the occult arts. Anton LaVey brought sex into his belief system, into his philosophy, and it was during the time of the 1960s and 1970s when there was sexual freedom and much more individual inputs and feelings. Each person was a star as opposed to a member of overall society. From this quote here, the reason there has always been such fascination for witchcraft and sorcery is because it has been consistently considered taboo. And he mentions sex as well as being taboo and being one of the hallmarks that draws people to his new fledgling association called Satanism. And his church took form in 1966. Obviously, LaVey, coming from a carny background in the carnival and understanding human nature, not only saw a good place to place sex and sexuality within Satanism, but also went as far as to omit the devil, replacing it with a piece of the self, which was the carnal. Again, pointing back to the fact that this was Atheism 101, and pretty much has remained so even until today. Satanism does advocate free love, but only in the true sense of the word. Free love in the satanic concept means exactly that. Freedom to indulge your sexual desires with as many others as you feel is necessary to satisfy your particular needs. If a person has no proper release for his desires, they rapidly build up and become compulsions. This was a quote from LaVey, and it pretty much remains true today. Again, LaVey understood the true nature of human beings, and that true nature being nothing more than a fulfillment of any desires and wishes by the human. We found that as time moved on, from the 60s into the 70s and the 80s as well, we began to see not only the male-female union and relationship, but we also began to see more homoerotic, such as male, male, and female, female. Again, the emphasis was kind of placed on God is in the eye of the beholder, that there was no higher God. God was the self, the human aspect itself. We also see during this time the development, or should I say the commercialism of the chakra system, which came into play and was now being embraced more by the West. These are Eastern beliefs that have been around since antiquity. However, they were being more and more commercialized and brought more and more into the mainstream of the West, along with the mysticism itself. Everything being clouded in mystery, making it even more desirable. We also see some things develop which moves us more into the alignment with our beliefs in magnum opus, that sex itself is not a wild orgy. It can be for those who want it to be, but for the large population, it is simply a controlled release, and it's used to heighten the pleasure and to build energy, and that energy is built as a byproduct of this heightened pleasure. And sometimes the pleasure would be heightened and held almost at a crescendo for a long period of time, yet building even more energy. This is something that is deep within the soul of the individual who is practicing Kundalini. This is not just lingam and yoni, but much, much more. It is a strong connection between both of the individuals during this act of love making as opposed to just sex. We see that emphasized a lot more, moving into the tantric love making type of embrace of sex, where sex moves now from a back room, a dirty act that is required to sustain humanity, to being more embraced, that it is not just used for procreation, but can be used as a tool not only to build energy, but to bring those who are actually coming together for that union, bringing them much, much closer into more of a soul experience. The mind, body, and heavens all aligning. One of the pioneers of this, Charles Muir, brought this to the forefront. His teachings of the love dance, these tantric type love-making positions where the two come together and form one. In his quote here, it pretty much sums up his belief that sex is an art form. Remove guilt, remove fear, and remove shame, and embrace the act itself. It is not dirty, it is not forbidden, and it is certainly not just for procreation purposes. If you are not familiar with his work, you could look on YouTube, or you can look into some of his books, because he has a very good approach, and a profound realization can be found by all practitioners. We find that sex in art has always been there, especially in the satanic, where satanic sex sells. Again, Anton LaVey embraced that and put that out in the forefront. And it was really a great marketing tool that LaVey used to bring people into his group. It was part of the dissatisfaction of many of the core members, like Michael Lucchino, who began to see LaVey's practice of the fledgling Satanism being nothing more than a parlor trick and a Hollywood who's who's party. It was for this reason that Aquino went out on his own and wrote some very, very great pieces of literature surrounding Satanism, and went on to form the Temple of Set, his own satanic order, which totally dismissed the atheistic point and embraced that which is true in the formation of Satan being one with the practice of Satanism, one from which magnum opus is a branch of, since we discard the overall idea of atheism and we embrace the term devil worship. We have seen throughout antiquity sex moving more and more into the forefront. It has always been there, and it's important to note that through shame and ridicule, established religions have taken sex and turned it again into something that is filthy and dirty. It is neither one of those, nor is it something that has to be done in the dark, under the cover of darkness, away from mainstream. And this becomes very, very true when we see that some of the practices of today actually bring the satanic and the sexual together in a union that really works for many practitioners. We also see, as things progress during history and historical times, sex begins to move more and more into a symbolism of sex. Matter of fact, we see many, many pieces of art that portray the symbolism of Adam and Eve from the Bible receiving a charge or a temptation from the devil, represented as a serpent, to tempt them into understanding the forbidden knowledge, becoming one with the God of the heaven. This can also be seen as symbolism, and often is, as the first act of sex, which was seen to be by Adam and Eve something natural. And because of that forbidden knowledge, because not only had she been tempted, but she tempted Adam, the two were metaphorically and symbolically thrown out of this Garden of Eden. Again, symbolism, sex, and the satanic coming together. We also see Pan and the symbolism of the devil, and all of those things that come from Pan, such as music and some of the literature. We see those things all coming together and combining once again the sexual, the satanic, the devil, and antiquity itself, forming a new derivative to be expressed through art. We also see architecture evolving, and some of the things that are used in architecture taking on more and more of a sexual overtone, not even an undercurrent. It's moving more and more into the public and into the public eye. This in itself becomes part of the gateway for the overall enlightenment which comes about and moves sex much more from just being in the bedroom or just being certain ways, maybe missionary style, to moving much more into positions, even menage a trois taking place, the cunnilingus and the different sexual acts that are done, representing the phallic symbol as well as the female bowl or womb itself. Again, the Enlightenment moves more and more into the mainstream, and while still quite taboo, it begins to move even further and further. Next, we have the art form of sex moving more and more and being more and more pervasive throughout culture. We begin to see these things again coming much more from the darkness into the light and forming more and more of the public's perception of these things. And it's not just in certain geographical locations, but it is across the entire world. We see it in different drawings and art from China, Japan, Indonesia, Middle East, Europe, and ultimately the Americas as well. All of these things combine to come together to say sex is good. Sex is good. We continue to progress along this way as we start to see multiple sex partners, and we're seeing more and more of the soul practitioners. We're now moving more and more into multiple partners and even into orgies and having really no apprehensions as we see in some of the artist renderings, engravings. We see that there are no apprehensions, that some of these things are absolutely verbatim, anything goes. And this type art, again, while being shunned, is beginning to take on more and more of the reality of what goes on behind closed doors, while also embracing the multitude that understands that this happens exactly like this, or to some strong degree like this, while also understanding that this may be in the back room, but it is not bad. It is good, and it happens. It happens every day. And again, sex being used more and more for enjoyment and self-fulfillment, even recreation, rather than just procreation. We also see homoerotic type artwork, and we know that back during the times of the Roman Empire and really all throughout history, we see homosexual activities, lesbian activities reflected in art. And again, the message being, do what thy wilt, to coin the phrase by Aleister Crowley. More and more of what the desires are of the human and what those desires fulfill for the human himself or herself, taking center stage. All of this combining and obviously moving from the back rooms more into the mainstream. Now, during history, this ebbs and flows and really depends strongly upon the geopolitical situations, the different empires, the different rulers, the different Reichs, as it were. And obviously these things come to the forefront, and then obviously they're pushed back as well. They don't cease to exist. They just move fluidly from the forefront back into a more occult not magic-wise, but occult meaning covered or secretive. However, they do not cease to exist, never have, and never will. We also see through art, as we progress through history, even from antiquity, we see certain things as bestiality, S&M. We see more taboo type things being expressed. And again, while these things are suppressed by mainstream, they still exist and they still happen. Very much so from antiquity was bestiality and the embrace, and we see this done many times in art, where we see an embrace, a sexual encounter with animals such as geese or swans or things like that. And we find that not only are the animals pleasuring the human, but the human in turn attempts to pleasure the animal. Again, moving all of this from the back rooms into the forward or the mainstream. We also see the pervasiveness of art becoming more direct. It's moving more and more from just an artistic representation where a lot of things are filled in by the viewer of the art to more and more explicit means, going straight to the point, the penis and the vagina, or the penis and the anus, or the vagina to the vagina. And we see these things progressively meaning more and more, falling in line with what truly happens all the time. We also see more and more of religious type paintings which embrace the sexual and combine that with certain things like the suffering of the Messiah from the Bible. And we see these things take on a life of their own, not only as blasphemy, which is used greatly in the satanic world and the occult as a whole, more and more in the secular realm, but we see it taking on more and more of political statement against the established religions themselves. So we come to our beliefs and the way that we look at satanic lust and satanic sex and the sex acts themselves. And so I have put together a list of the things that we believe and we practice in our satanic coven. Sex is good and has unequivocal place in satanic magic. That in itself is first and foremost. There is no reason whatsoever to discard or to not utilize sex in satanic magic. In fact, quite the opposite. There are many benefits for doing this. Not only the building of energy, the manipulation of energy, the harnessing of energy, and the direct communication with demons, demonic spirits, and the hosts of hell, but also in sex magic for fulfilling a primal need and a primal desire as a byproduct of that. Nothing wrong with it. It should be embraced and Obviously, in Magnum Opus, we do embrace it and we do use it not only as a tool, a means to the end, but we also use it for personal satisfaction as well. And you can be as creative about this as you want to be, and I certainly encourage you to do so. Next, lust is a powerful component, well positioned in satanic ritual. Again, not only the act itself, but lust itself. The looking at the naked body or whatever the desires are of the practitioner. This comes into focus and is a very real component and very powerful and should be used as such. We also believe that human feelings and pleasure are pinnacles of energy working, that without feelings or without pleasure, you're missing one of the pillars of satanic magic. The self must be fulfilled. And obviously we believe as Satanists, more especially devil worshippers, that the self is the highest. Taking this one step further, the fulfillment of self through feelings, through pleasure, through satisfaction, and ultimately through closure of a certain event. These are very real humanistic qualities that need to be satisfied. Going back to what Anton LaVey said about these things, moving from just lusts and just ideas to being compulsions is very much true. And we very much accept that and embrace that fact that there is no act that is too taboo as long as it is done between willing participants. We also believe that each member dictates the method and means as desired. So, kind of going back to Charles Muir and his explanation of sex, the pounding, the probing, the attack of the sexual member, while that may be something that someone wants and even requests, it does not mean that everyone subscribes to that same methodology of completion. And so truly understanding what the member wants, what the individual practitioner wants, and how individualistic these things are and can be tailored to great effect is very, very important. Also, mutual patience is a requirement for successful workings. We understand that building energy and prolonging the release of energy is very, very productive. And it is very, very effective. It's a very effective means to be used in satanic magic and satanic ritual as well. But we also understand that it has to be, in some cases, selfless and intelligent. So the separation between the animal who, to coin the phrase, cannot hold his or her load, and the one who can control that, bringing the other partner to climax, is what we're looking for, most importantly. Not just getting yours, but helping the other get theirs as well. And I include this quote, Eloi need not apply. This is something that is much more progressive and a much more intelligent type of concept, and it requires some time and energy to truly understand. You won't find this on your cell phone. I'm sorry. This is something that takes on a life of its own. However, the basis for that must be complete and totally understood. We also understand that judgment has no place in the satanic sanctum. Not at all. No judgment, no prejudice. For what one person likes, maybe another person does not subscribe to that. But it is not to be judged. It is not to be frowned upon. It is not to be relegated to the darkest portion of the sanctum. No, this is something that should be embraced, celebrated, and used by the entire membership of the coven. Judgment has no place whatsoever in that type situation. We also believe that intimacy and tactility become one with a clear objective. Again, this takes the concept of the mechanical and moves it more into the means of it being spiritual and mechanical, while fulfilling a deep embedded need in the physical body and the psyche itself. These two combine into something that obviously you have to have the objective to know once you arrive at the destination. And as I have said before many, many times, you must start with a clear objective, a clear goal for what you want to accomplish with the working. And sexual magic, satanic sex, there is no difference between those. And so you must begin with that clear objective. Nicholas and Zena Schreck, for quite a bit of time, actually were at the forefront when it came to Satanism. Obviously, Zena is Anton LaVey's daughter, and they actually wrote a book called The Demons of the Flesh, and they explained, again, kind of what we are talking about here, of how sex has been painted with a broad brush as negative and negativity, and it really should not be. It should be celebrated, it should be embraced, and no matter what the desire or the need, it should come to fruition by the practitioner. One more thing to add before I close this episode is we have to also take stock in the occult, in the satanic. We have come a long way, and if you're older like I am, you probably remember the Virginia Slims ad that ran so many times through the 70s and I think even into the 80s themselves. But the slogan was, "You've come a long way, baby." And obviously we have, as the occult in general, the left-hand path more specific, and Satanists to be labeled as such. However, we have a long way to go. We still battle the same thing, the same prejudice, the same judgment. It's just done on a platform like YouTube or Facebook or any of these other money-making enterprises that are really nothing more than commercialism at its best. There is a place for the satanic, for satanic lust and for satanic sex. And those things should be in the forefront, out front, not in the back. However, we still have a long way to go. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. This is our thoughts and the way that we embrace satanic lust and satanic sex within Magnum Opus. Before I go, thank you again for being a Patreon. You are the reason that I do this, and I hope that you receive a great satanic blessing for that, and you find this series to be a value add. Until next time, this has been Aleister Nacht. Hail Satan.